Welcome to the Modern Job Hunt. This is a series that I'm starting to basically dialogue some of my job hunting experience, talk to people I've met along the way. And kudos to Katherine here, my first guest on the series, for coming up with both the idea and being one of my job hunt buddies these past few weeks. And so the first series is going to be about, or the first talk today is going to be about layoffs, severance packages, the first 2 weeks, all that emotional roller coaster that you go through when you basically get brought into that meeting. So yeah, I'm Ryan, senior product manager, trying to figure out the next thing, and I'll pass it to Katherine for an intro.
My name is Katherine. Professionally, I'm a product manager. Sometimes I identify it as other things as well, but most of the time I spend I spend a lot of time mentoring and coaching now. And yes, I work in product, and I'm moving from. I originally started in ed tech, then I moved to M&A, the mergers and acquisitions, and now I'm moving into age tech, which will be an interesting shift for me.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, like, hopefully today what we can do is talk about um, the layoff. So I think that what a lot of people think is that layoffs are the worst thing in the world. And before I pass kind of the mic to you, I will say that I've been laid off more than once, and I think that for those of us in technology, that is part of the job. Unfortunately, it's kind of this is an unfortunate thing they don't tell you in school, that you're going to get laid off in the modern 2020s workforce. And I think how you actually rebound from that is the part that it's all about. So why I wanted to talk about layoffs specifically in this episode and our experiences is that a lot of people are going through this, and it may be their first layoff. So hopefully this is the part of job hunting that is the emotional part, that people can kind of be like, okay, there's more than me that are just. And if anyone is watching on LinkedIn Live, feel free to comment or chat, and I think it'll appear in the stream that Katherine and I are in. But yeah, so yeah, my experience is not the first time, but yeah, how was your layoff experience?
So this was my first layoff. However, I think one of the things I I had set my expectations a long time ago when I had originally joined this company, because this was very, very early stage. I had joined pre-revenue and things like that. And I remember speaking to my product manager friends, and I remember one of them saying, is like, you do realize that the chance of failure will be very high. And I think that was very grounding for me to hear. And instead of seeing that as something scary, I was like, okay, well then that means that as long as I condition myself, I should be okay. But despite that, this was the exact play by play when it happened. I had just come from my first, actually my honeymoon. It was a very delayed one. It was a year away from the wedding itself. I'd come back, and then I noticed a couple of my recurring meetings, specifically with key decision makers, were canceled. So then I had asked one of my teammates, like, what's going on? And they said, you'll see. And immediately with that message, I had a sense like, I think I know what's happening. So then I sat with in the meeting with the CEO, and then they described what the situation was. They were very, very kind in terms of, like, it wasn't the layoff experience that some people experience, where it's like, you just get cut off from everything, and then you're just like, you're delivered a letter later. I was told, like, the situation, and I had time to wrap up things in about, I think I had 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to wrap things up. So it was still a relatively like softer landing than some, but yeah, it still definitely hurt and wasn't easy to process. And I remember right after that, I had texted my husband just to, like, I'm like, I just lost my job. I'd like, let me process that. I'm gonna need the whole day to, like, kind of like process this in my head. So that was my experience.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing and I can resonate with is, even though you went into a company where you knew there were risks, even though you knew the cash situation in the business, even when you saw those meetings canceled, it still takes time to process. And yeah, I'll kind of tell my story, but I was at a company that had done a layoff before I joined, and I you always think that they're done, and unfortunately the reality is that, like, you never know, and even the company you're in today could be the one that's laying people off, and the company that you're joining is the more stable one. So you never know, unfortunately, in the tech sector. And so I joined, they did a layoff within a month. I was fine, so that was layoff two, and then there was kind of some kind of slow shifts as the business restabilized. And I think that's one of the things that, like, they're joining and then having a layoff so close also was the first time that I had like survivor's guilt of kind of a layoff. Is that, like, I joined and I was like, wow, a bunch of people just got laid off, I'm still here. In the past, it's always been, I was one of the many that were part of the kind of cut. And so that was the first time. And I had a similar experience where, like, suddenly my meetings were getting canceled for this one with the leadership people. And I was like, that's different. And like, I wasn't being assigned work at an accelerated rate. So kind of not being my first layoff, I was thinking, okay, usually this means there's like a leadership cog moving. And I'm like, I don't know which way this dial is going to go. Am I in or am I out? And so you kind of just have to wait patiently. And like, I actually mentioned to my wife, like, the day before, I'm like, hey, I got this 8 a.m. meeting. That's pretty rare to have an 8 a.m. meeting. Like, usually I find 9 is when you try to organize meetings for as a nice time. But if it's an 8 a.m., I found the early morning meetings there tend to be when companies try to do layoffs, because they just get it out of the way, rip the Band-Aid off. And so I was like, I don't think this one's going to go well. And sure enough, I was done in, I think, 7 minutes. And it was like, okay, I understood my terms and all that kind of stuff, and can't explicitly state them because of NDAs and all that kind of stuff. But it was like, I understood that I was done, and laptop basically locked itself within a couple minutes, and went on with my day. And I actually went for brunch. I don't know about you, but like, I pretty much shut the computer and I'm like, I gotta drop my kid off, and then went for brunch and just sat there by myself. Took a peek. I bought a London Drugs is like a Shoppers out here, and bought a pen and paper and just sat there writing down ideas of like what I wanted to learn and do, and like restreaming, podcasting. This is something that I had on that list. And so now I'm like 6 weeks in, I get the first restream up and kind of testing out new content creation ideas. So like, it was kind of like, I feel like what I wanted to see is like, did you find it was a bit of a rebirth too? Like, you're opening a new chapter that you never do when you just jump job to job. When you jump job to job, it's always like, your path. It's like, it's literally, you take one step forward, it's the next job. But when there's a layoff, it's this, I feel like you get a bit of air. It's like, it's not the best air that you want to breathe, but sometimes it's the air that you need.
Yeah. I think for me, it really helped that this layoff was not my first period of unemployment. So in 2021, when I was working in ed tech, I was working at a company for 10 years. I burned out pretty badly, where I was in the middle of a one-on-one with my boss, and it was a regular scheduled one-on-one. It wasn't like a layoff announcement or anything like that. But in the middle of a one-on-one, I just couldn't do it anymore. In the middle of it, I just asked for my resignation. I didn't even know how to properly resign. I just said, "Is it okay that I resign?" Like, that was exactly how I asked it. And I started a sabbatical, and that was honestly a lot scarier initially, because I didn't expect to do that day. That was definitely not on my to-do list at all. I just said it, and then it was finalized that I was going to take a break from work. So, and because I went on that journey, I had to find play in a period of time where I was deliberately trying to not work I think that that gave me the practice that allowed me to handle this layoff a lot better than I think I would have if I didn't do this. So yeah, that was my journey. So yes, I do agree. It was like it's definitely a chance for a breather, and I think generally speaking, these are a lot of fun. I mean, for me, because I had that sabbatical to draw from.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, further to my comment about this being like a muscle of being in tech that you got to practice. Like I quit my first job out of university and did a year of traveling and consulting in different countries, and I loved it. And I that was my first time blogging, first time practicing with like photos, all kinds of stuff, and it was like a blast. And I would just work when I wanted to work, and then like kind of travel a bit, and so like I think both of us have done non-work before, which I
Mhm.
think can be daunting for someone that has always worked. Even
Yeah,
if you've worked for like your 10-year work experience, and then you did not you did a sabbatical for a while. It's like it's almost like anyone watching that's like this is their first layoff. It's like, okay, learn how to do this, and
yeah,
and it's a skill, and like,
yes,
because unfortunately you'll probably be back here at some point in the future, and either on your own choice or not, and then you know you get an opportunity to figure out what you want to do next.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's really important. So one thing that I found myself doing during that sabbatical was I just started like mentoring individuals, especially when they were taking, whether by choice or not, some sort of like period of unemployment, and then helping them find the concept of play. And it's so fascinating to me because I look at like I have younger cousins and I look at them and they have no issue finding play. Like if you watch a young child, like they just go and let their minds explore, and then they just pick up activities. Whereas like for us, I think as adults we got that beaten out of us, that we're not allowed to explore and play anymore. So that's unfortunate, but it is something that we can relearn. And that's what I've learned. Like in my first 2 weeks after the layoff, I literally played. Like I don't know if anybody plays any video games, but the Zelda game recently came out a few months ago, so that's exactly what I did. I saved Hyrule. Yeah, actually all I did. I was like, yeah, no, I'm just gonna play video games. I rarely would ever have that kind of time, so that's what I did.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do much prep for this episode last night, but I got thinking about all the
Yeah,
tools and concepts that job hunters could use in my network and all kind. And I was just like jamming last night for like an hour and a half on what this series could be and all that kind of
yeah,
stuff. And it's like an open canvas kind of thing that,
yeah,
like, typically as a product person, you get like maybe 10% of that creative
yes,
energy, and 90%, 95% is just like execution, data harvesting, and like all that kind of work.
yeah,
But it's like it's that 10% that's why we do our job, and now we kind of get to do it all the time, all
yeah,
bet unpaid.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it could turn paid. Do you find yourself like like the money aspect aside, do you find it more fulfilling now?
um I mean, I think part of what I love about products is that you can scale an
Mm,
idea.
mm,
And so a lot of what I'm doing now is like self discovery, learning, small, like this creation there, to my immediate network. But I think that's the beauty of kind of jumping on a ship that's already kind of set sail, is that you can really like scale something.
mhm.
Whereas this is almost like in the product concept of kind of like the guy in the coffee machine. I'm like really like mechanically moving everything, and doing it all. And so it doesn't scale, but it's kind of like it is. And I guess on the fulfilling piece, I think one thing that is the beauty of end to end is end to end. Like when you're in a big corporation, even in a company, you do something and you deliver it, and it's like, oh, I was like 1/10 of that. Maybe in your resume
Yeah.
you put I did this, but you're
Yeah.
like you're like 1/1000th sometime.
Yeah.
Whereas like this, it's like, it's like me and you jamming, creating this content right now, and we're just having fun. And it's like we own this like end to end, which is like kind of the beauty of the job hunt.
Yeah.
You get to really like do things and say, I did that. And that's kind of one of the things that as a digital worker, I'm kind of like, sometimes you finish a whole day and you're like, what did I do? I went to 4 hours, 5 hours of meetings. I moved things around in Slack, and like this, like, it's kind of cool that you actually like do things.
Yeah.
Even boring job applications, you bang out 10 job applications and you're like, I did 10 today.
Yeah.
That can be something that even like you don't release something in a sprint and you're like, I literally did, what did I do in 2 weeks? Like, can't even claim anything. I feel like as a job hunter, you do something every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. Yeah. Very. And I saw that you are doing a lot more conversation now. How are those like, and how did you kind of discover this?
Yeah, I'm so part of, Catherine mentioned using this tool, and it was like how to book faster meetings. And I put this on one of my LinkedIn posts, and I was like, I'm booking 30-minute slots with people very easily because it requires less back and forth. And those conversations are great. They give me energy, and it kind of allows me to keep going. And you get a lot of rejections as a job hunter, which you're familiar with. And like, if you get a rejection and you go into a call with a friend or someone in your community, you're like, by the end of that call, you're like, whatever, that 4 job applications that failed this morning, they don't matter because I had a good connection that day. And that's your win for the day. So yeah, I am like picking up little tidbits too about like how to job hunt better from yourself. We've had a whole bunch of conversations from friends like Mark, and Stuart and others that are giving me ideas of how they succeeded in landing jobs. And then I'm hoping to pass those on through things like this and through one-on-one to like the group that come, because you were like a month ahead of me. Mark was like 3 months ahead of me. I feel like you do learn a lot, which is why I wanted to kind of like do these things. It's like
Mhm.
you almost got to pass the torch to the
Yeah.
next group, unfortunately, that is laid off, and that is the tech sector right now. It's just kind of like rolling, and hopefully we'll all catch a tailwind and be back to work soon. But unfortunately, it is kind of this, you got to pass the torch, you got to feed the community.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what has been the most impactful conversation you've heard so far?
um, yeah, the most impactful conversation, I don't know, I'll throw it back to you first, and then I will think about it, and then I'll come back.
Okay. Well, okay, so I've been on this conversation track for a long time. So this is I was when I was started doing the conversations again during this period, it was exactly what I was doing before, which was just like really fun conversation. I very rarely had asked anybody anything about job seeking. I don't think so. No, I hadn't. And I think the conversation that comes to mind right now is, okay, I'm going to reference, I once ran into an ultra high net worth coach in one of my conversations. Now, in case anybody's wondering, I am not an ultra high net worth individual, very poor, nowhere close. Uh, and then she was explaining to me how she advises her clients to exert influence. Now, this might seem very unrelated to everything. Now, and yes, it is, but this also describes like how my journey of conversation goes. She was talking about how to exert influence in certain areas of impact investing. So she specifically coaches people on impact investing. So, you know how right now there's a current trend of people pushing for green tech and green solutions. And she said a lot of her clients, their reaction is to pull their money out of oil and put it into green solutions. And she said she actually advises not to do that because these individuals, they don't have like, a few $1,000s. We're talking about like really massive dollars. She said actually it makes a lot more sense to keep your money where it is right now, let's say in the oil companies, and then use that as a method to influence those companies to, let's say, install a director onto the board that is green focused, green forward. And she said that person will have a lot more impact, because if you leave your position in the oil company, the person who will replace you is somebody who won't care. And I was like, that was very impactful for me, when I'm thinking about like where I want to spend my time. Now, obviously, I'm not playing with those type of chess pieces in terms of dollars, but I have those chess pieces in terms of where I spend my time and influence and where I have access to. So like, let me distill that down. Basically, use the platform that you currently have to exact the change that you want to see. And it's not just by following the next most popular trend and moving in that direction, but to be aware of where you are right now and where you currently have your holdings, and creating the change from where you are. So I was like, wow, that's super impactful. That is something that I don't often think about. And the lesson that it came from an ultra high net worth coach is fascinating to me, because like these are the people, like she coaches individuals like the families of Succession, if you've ever seen that show. That these are her clients, and she's like, this is what she often has to teach them. And I'm like, well, I've learned a very valuable lesson. And something that I take into my practice when I go into like mentoring and coaching, that, I don't have to be everything to everybody all at once. I just have to focus on who I have access to.
Yeah, totally understand. I when I was in solar,
Yeah.
I in the past as a product manager, I talked to someone that I knew from Total, and Total is one of the
Yeah.
major oil and gas companies, and his view was that oil and gas companies are largely finance companies. And that's, you see that general trend in everything nowadays. Everyone wants to shift into fintech and offer financial
Yes.
services as a layer. And he was saying that like as oil and gas becomes less profitable, then they will naturally migrate over, because what they're really good at is raising money in the financial side. So I can understand that advisor's comments is that like really they adapt to the financial markets and to their investors. So as an investor, you have a significant lever to play in that market.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can totally relate to kind of like where you can apply yourself. And this kind of like goes back to like Philip made one of the comments on the side there about kind of energy and positivity and whatnot. And I think that mentorship that you mentioned and these conversations, like you don't leave your day if you've had a conversation and helped someone in a bad state. And I think that is what's critical is like don't always apply for jobs for 8 hours a day. I don't think you can survive doing that. It's just like
No.
your brain is done. But like if you can put enough like positive boosts throughout your week, you finish relatively strong. And I think that's the thing that like the first 2 weeks, which is what this call was all about, chatting about this layoff kind of window, is really figuring that transition out. Is like, because of course I first thought I got to work on my CV, I got to apply for jobs, all that kind of stuff. And then
Yeah.
my immediate thing was like, I got to have a support network. And that's where I reached out to Mark and found you and some others. And it's like, okay, we built a little crew and we're now supporting each other on kind of getting to the next phase. And I think that like group thing was the smartest thing I did in my first 2 weeks, was just like go on my LinkedIn and find all the people that were unemployed and open to work on LinkedIn, and messaged a few of them that were like my peers. And I was like, I gotta talk to someone every week at least. And then that spun into conversations with you that were like, no, don't talk to us on Monday. Talk to someone every day or every second day. And then you just power through the week. And then I am getting more applications out, because like I may have a day full of meetings chatting to people, but like the next day I'm like, okay, I'm on it today because I'm energized. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing, for people that I found very helpful during my sabbatical, was creating structure in my day. That's something that I think was, for me, I underestimated the power of structure versus like when I was employed versus taking a sabbatical, because you, unlike being laid off, where you have that, innate sense of creating your resume. You have like a long list of to-dos. When I went from like cold turkey quitting my job, I actually had nothing. So I had a complete vacuum. And that was really weird to look at because I had no regular anything, like no stand up, no check in, nothing. So the very first thing I had to do, okay, so the very first thing I actually had to do, and something that I don't think people talk about enough, is like grieving for the job. I know it's a job, it's not a person, but you still have to grieve for like what you had. And I think people go straight into job seeking without doing that enough. So grieving first and spend as much time as you need to like kind of decompress from that. But then the second thing was actually creating that structure. So one of the first things I did when I started my sabbatical was actually book it solid with conversation. So I had at one point like 8 conversations, like 8 1-hour conversations a day. So my day was full. And then in between those conversations, I would write notes and write reflections about everything. So like my day was very, very packed. So even though I wasn't working, I was very occupied with thinking about all these different directions. Also, even thinking about how all these conversations are related and how who might benefit from speaking to each other. So that, but that structure was what saved me because it kept me on something that made me excited for the next day and gave me energy to keep going. Despite in that situation, I had no idea what I was going towards, but I was going somewhere. I knew that was for sure. I was going somewhere, but I wasn't really necessarily searching for a job. I wasn't driving for a specific outcome. I was just, just going by that day. This time around, the major difference was that I made sure, because dealing with a layoff, dealing with rejections specifically, was very depressing. So one thing I made sure to fit in almost every day was a session of Muay Thai. And people would ask like, why that sport? Why? And I'm like, well, you see, in my mind, if I can accomplish one tough thing a day, like finishing a Muay Thai workout session for which my coach is a very tough individual, um, I know I have done something good. Like I'm like, I did that. I might have gotten like 20 rejections, but I did my Muay Thai workout at 7 a.m. in the morning today. So, and that was really what kept me kind of like positive throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I can totally relate. Like, I think for anyone that hasn't read Atomic Habits, it's like one of my favorite books. I listen to it almost every year. And it just talks about, yeah, it's like November on Audible. I'm just on it, getting ready for the next year. And it's got so many good nuggets in it.
Yeah.
It's one of the few ones that I've listened to a bunch of times. And they talk about how like mornings and habits, and I've adopted like so many of them, just putting the gear out the night before and all that kind of stuff. It means I do
Yeah.
it like, I don't get it up every single time, but like I do it like much higher frequency than if I don't. And
Yeah.
they talk about how like you can't have a bad day if you got your workout and you ate healthy. Like, I mean, when you get a really bad rejection, sometimes like I would say like to anybody watching, like, yeah, I just sometimes say screw it and close the laptop and
Yeah.
don't do anything for the rest of the day. That's just how and we talked about that in one of the Monday sessions,
Yeah.
how like it's an emotional like roller coaster. And sometimes you just gotta be like, I can't do anything today. This is like too much. I'm gonna take a break. And that's kind of like part of the job hunt, is like managing the energy levels, which is something that doesn't fit into 9 to 5. Like you can have your structure, but like adding that energy piece is like also something that comes with time and practice.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, and I don't know if anybody has ever tried like something, a fitness activity that's incredibly high intensity, like Muay Thai, is that it's challenging physically. It'll get your blood running. You're hardly any blood running in your head. You can't think of anything anyway. And then they give you combos to remember midway. Is that I actually don't have the capacity to think of anything else during that 1 hour process, like the 1 hour workout, which is such a relief on my brain. I didn't realize how I thought I would just be like stuck in the thought of like, oh man, I got rejected. But like in the middle of those workouts, I cannot, if I wanted to, just like be pitiful and think about all the rejection. I just can't. I'm just trying not to get hit. Like that's my only
Yeah.
thought during the whole process. And then when I'm done the workout, like obviously I would remember what I was worried about prior to that, but that whole 1 hour process, I had a break, and I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. That's kind of nice. So that is part of why I do something that high intensity, is to take my mind off things.
Yeah, and I think that like one of the things when we were chatting about structure is that everyone in the group that had kids were very like, we got this structure thing down
Yeah.
pat because we
Yeah.
have no choice. But it's like I hadn't thought of the other side of the fence where I've like, had kids for a while. So it's like,
Yeah.
what happens when you don't have kids, and you're just like exactly what you said, it just throws your whole routine off because you don't have to be somewhere at 9, you don't have to be somewhere at 5,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. So I think that like how people approach the whole job hunt and layoff is really like variable depending on their life at the
Yeah.
time. And I think we talked a little bit about self-identification, and like
Mm.
we're both not 20 anymore. And I think that like when you get out of school, you kind of self-identify as the job that you go into because
Yeah.
it's what you trained like all these years to do. And you're like, I did all this schooling to get this job and now they laid me off. Well, over time, you gradually realize these jobs don't mean everything. You're gonna get a new one every 2 or 3 years at the most, and it's. I think if you're in your 20s, this could be harder for you
Yeah.
than kind of in your 30s when you're like, hey, this is par for the course.
Yeah. I like these messages from Philip. What would it be like if feeling positive energy was easy, and then going to your job interviews feeling incredibly good about yourself and what you bring? I I I like that comment simply because I'm pretty sure the interviews I have performed the best in were ones where I actually felt great. That I wasn't dealing with any sort of like feelings prior to that. Like in the interviewer, recruiter, hiring manager, whatever, they can see it. So if you come in like a dejected person, they like that's their first impression of you. So coming in with the right kind of energy was really really important for me. Yeah, but
Yeah, I can relate to that. And one little tip that like there's a different Philip that I used to work at TELUS, and he talked after he got a role with Microsoft, or no, it was Amazon at the time, and he was talking about how he blocked off like 30 to 45 minutes before every interview to make sure he was like ready and relaxed and calm and ready.
mm,
And one thing that I've added is like I don't check email in that like time window before, or I try my best not to check email, because the worst thing that I think can happen is getting a rejection about a totally different job while you're going into a job interview, and or like any negative energy
yeah,
while you're like preparing. So it's like at least if you have a half hour, you can reset. Even if you get an email at 9, if your interview's at 11, you're like, you can be
mm,
good to go by 11. You go for a walk, you flush, but yeah, I think that if you read too many emails right before an interview, it can sink you.
yeah, yeah, and also making sure none of your tabs are open during an interview. That's also helpful because like Slack or whatever notifications could come through still, and they can throw you right off. And oh.
Yeah. So the latest question was how to use this to get past the stack of resumes. And so one of the things I've tried recently is being unapologetically unique in my CV on the first page. I
Mhm.
talk about like food that I like. I talk about like running shoes that I like because I'm a big runner. I have a radar graph around my PM strengths and it pulls in different directions. Like super random stuff. And like if you're
Yeah.
interviewing me, you're probably interviewing me because of the stuff on the first page that's like, oh, did this 400% increase of this 400%. But like after the first minute of the call, do you really want to talk about everything? You want to talk about who I am, you want to talk about
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So I think it's like, how do you beat the ATS system and have personal stuff in your CV? It's like a super hard balance. But I find that like, yeah, I read a bunch of stuff about CVs like a year or two ago, and it talked about how basically creating bias in the interview can lead you to go further rounds. And I've been super trying to do that the whole time, which is like you're not going to hire me because I'm 10% better than some other person. You're going to hire me because it's me. And like,
Yeah.
if you can create that unique lock during an interview structure, you can get deeper into the rounds. And then it's a matter of like a coin flip usually at the end.
Yeah. I think one of the things is that also, and this is a lesson I took from a coach actually, from a very different concept, but they were talking about being able to create community around you. If you're unapologetically yourself, you will attract people who are kind of like you, or are attracted to you. And I'm like, that's very much the same principle that we're using here when we do our applications. If we're unapologetically ourselves, hopefully we'll be matched with companies that will match us, and then we will match them. And I think especially now that we're not, this is not our first rodeo. And I think for a lot of people watching, it's probably not their first rodeo as well. I think one thing is to be said is the culture of an organization matters a lot. Like aside from the pay, the compensation, perks, all that type of stuff, knowing, like, being in an organization where you fit in truly is important. Like the way you work fits in the way that they work. And to me, that's a lot more important than like just getting a pay and having an environment that just doesn't quite suit you.
Yeah. And I think that the different thing versus our parents' generation is like, it's no long, like I think the resume and the schools, like if you were in Montreal and you went to McGill and you worked for a company in Montreal, like there, like it was like that process and they had to hire someone in Montreal. Now it's like they can hire you from anywhere. So I think cultural fit becomes that much more important, and on both sides, because you have the option. You're like, oh, I'm someone that like, I love remote first. I think there's still a role for in-person gatherings and
Yep.
bringing people together, but I think that like you get a wider variety of people that are specialized in an area and interested in an area, and have better balance and a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm a remote person, and like I can find companies that are like that, and people that are like me, and yeah, I think we're still figuring out remote, but like I love that we can match better than like our parents' generation. And it does hurt a lot more though, when, because you develop this relationship and this soft capital and all that with all these people, and then you get laid off.
Yeah.
And so it's like we're both a generation that has more choice, but then a generation that has a lot more layoffs and kind of ups and downs. That's a lot more variability.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, I was just talking to my uncle about this, and he's like the one, well, leader of the I mean leader as an age of the baby boomer group, and he was talking about all the pension plans, and I'm like, we don't get that amazing pension. We don't have that. We don't have that. Like they're talking about, like, that was a very different time when you would be a lifer at a company because like they just had amazing pensions. But nowadays, I don't know many companies that really even maintain, even like the big banks of Canada, a lot of them have phased that out. So if you were to join a big bank now, you won't have access to those really great pension plans that they once had. Maybe the government still has good pension, I think.
Government, yeah.
Yeah.
Provincial, federal, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like, just before we went live, one of Philip's comments about cultural fit, and when we were chatting about how, like salary transparency and other things, like we're
Yeah.
both big fans of that, and how like some companies are doing it really well. Like there's one company out there that I've seen, you need a budget, and I think their process is like crazy long. They take like 3 or 4 months to hire a role, but they have like
Ooh.
7 rounds. They lay it all out at the start. They have videos to prepare. This is the right fit for you. They're like super
Yeah.
clear on everything. So then it's like, is this something for me or is it not for me?
Yeah.
And very few companies I feel like are laying it all out and saying, this is what we're about to do. Like
Yeah.
even I found in some interview rounds, they add rounds. Like they're like, oh, now we want you to talk to this
Yeah.
stakeholder, that stakeholder. And it's like, you're changing your process. Like how, why?
Yeah.
And like, like if you really needed that step, you should have, it's like, I understand that like maybe you need to adapt, but it's like, it's not your first product hire. Like you should have a
Yeah.
process. It's like if we were like building a systems architecture and we're like, we're just going to throw this in here. Like,
Yeah.
no, like don't think about this before you're going to post a role,
Yeah.
and lay the process out so your candidates can know this is right for me or not.
Yeah. I think sometimes that's also a symptom of how work is done internally, because what I can imagine, if they're very messy about that process, is that maybe they don't check in with all the right stakeholders up front, meaning that working there is probably going to be very similar. Anyway, I use that as a signal for me to figure out like what it is kind of like.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that like, so Philip put a comment on the side about like raising kids and employers and whatnot. I think that's another thing about kids and job
Yeah.
hunting is like, a, it's good because you have that structure and you finish the day
Yep.
at a certain time, but like you can't end the day annoyed and like engaged. And like maybe my wife would say I didn't do this 100% of the time in the last month and a half, but like I try my best to leave my office and not be emotionally drained. And so sometimes that does mean like powering down earlier,
Yeah.
because like it's not fair to anyone else in my family to bring the frustration of job hunting outside of my four walls that I operate within. And maybe you can relate as like someone that's married. You're like, hey, it's not my partner's problem that I'm job hunting. It's like, and I just got a rejection. I got to figure out how to compartmentalize it. And I think that compartmentalizing is like something that we can bring to employers as older hires. It's like
Yes.
we've started to figure out how to like compartmentalize and understand like, sometimes your manager has made a bad call, but you're like, that's probably because his manager made the bad call and my manager is just the one in the middle. So I think we're learning all these things as we get wrung out through life. But yeah, maybe you can comment to that.
Well, I don't have kids, but I could tell you the main difference. Like from my first like company, the ed tech one, and this one, the most recent one I was laid off from, was the difference in number of parents I was working with. So in the previous company, I was working a young 20 something year old, like classic startup, not many parents, or like if they became parents, it was later in the stages of the company. And then this other company where they already had kids, and I love that experience of working with people who already had kids, and you could tell they were devoted to their families because they had very clear lines of separation between work and my personal time. And that was actually a masterclass in like work life balance. And despite the outcome of effectively um, uh, having been laid off, I still love that experience because I learned from them. These are individuals who are high performing individuals, but they know exactly when to cut things off, and that nothing comes before family. It's very interesting because having come from an environment where you're super young, everybody's willing to work till like 3 4 a.m., like ready to go again the next day at like 9 a.m. again. That was really like our lifestyle. We didn't see anything beyond that. And now it's like, oh, I love working with parents, and they are very efficient too. That's my observation of working with parents. Like they're just really fast at making decisions because they got somewhere to be. They got to pick up kids. They got like when they have like a vacation plan, they're like, look, I have to plan the vacation, get all of my work done, and have everything ready to set because I got to also pack the bag for my husband. I was working with a person who was a wife. It's like I got to pack my bags for my husband as well and get all this stuff done. So like, chop, hurry up. And I'm like, that is efficient. You are very, very good at this.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate. I've definitely sped up a little bit and pre-planning. You're like, okay, I got to do that thing by Friday, so I'm actually got to do it by Sunday, and like there's no time in between that block. But I think also what I'm hearing from that is this is another gift that I think we get because we're not at the same employer forever. I think I have appreciated a lot of past employers more after like leaving them, and
Yeah.
then you see all these little things that like, okay, like that company did that well, that company did that well, and so
Mm.
because we're getting to see things, at different places, it's like we're gonna eventually, you know, have a much more steady hand when we're hopefully in positions of leadership. And I think that like one thing I want to like, the person that officially laid me off um, was super uncomfortable, and this was not my first layoff, and I know we had a great relationship in this recent company, and I was able to be like so nice back to him because I've done this before, and I know it's not like his fault. Like even at the companies where I was laid off by a founder and CEO, it's like the numbers just didn't work, and like at the time I was like super annoyed at that person, but like now I'm kind of like, ugh, it also sucks for the person on the other side. And like in a big corporate, like I wasn't in a huge corporate in my recent one, but like I could see that even being worse. You're like, someone 7 levels up said you got to cut 10%, and then this manager 7 levels down is like, my team is amazing, who do I cut? And so I think that there's like a level of learning that you get to after a few weeks after the job hunt, and when your second round comes around, you're like, that sucks to be in his shoes too.
Yeah. Is there a support group for people who do layoffs? I'm sure they need it actually too.
Yeah. I don't know. Like once I had a boss who was in EO, like entrepreneurs organization, and he said that was required because there's no one else to talk to at a certain level of an organization. You basically don't have peers that are in that position of like laying off VPs and stuff like that because you're the CEO. So I think hopefully as you go up, you kind of ladder with other people, and I think unfortunately maybe we'll be a level or two up in a couple of years, and maybe we'll have to lay people off. But it's like, it's a rough go on the other side too.
Yeah. I recently ran into this, it's kind of like this group coaching website called Sidebar. Lenny often advertises it, and it's particularly aimed for people who are leaders who are looking for that kind of group mentorship, because I realize that how lonely it is, because when you sit that far up on the top, and it might not be like that far up, you could be of a very small startup, but it's hard to find. So not as many people who can relate to it, or it's hard to find that group of people. So they have like group coaching for that, and I'm like, I understand that, and that's actually also where I found a lot of community, a lot of support when I was part of On Deck. When I was part of On Deck, they had a lot of support going to the founders, and like as a person who's worked with founders very intimately, both from a mentoring perspective and also like from an employment perspective, I can see there are a lot of challenges that they go through, and that's why I respect that journey so much, the founder journey, and why I personally know that it's not perfectly the right match for me and my own personal risk tolerance. It's tough out there, and it gets lonely too when you're, maybe you were in the beginning, people would praise you of how smart you are, of thinking of this visionary statement of what you're going to change in the world, and then the reality starts to hit where it's like you can't keep the staff that you brought on, and now you have to deliver the axe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 25-year-old founder that has never lived through life, I could see maybe that there's enough psychopathic founders out there that maybe they don't feel that pain, but like having lived through multiple layoffs myself and having a family and whatnot, I understand kind of belt tightening and certain other factors, and like to then go into a position of leadership and be like, okay, it's not me that it's like I'm impacting 10 families tomorrow or something like that, or like thousands of families. Like I would have a hard time sleeping. Like that is the one benefit of being kind of a relatively mid-level employee is you don't have to cut 1,000 people the next day or some of these things that it's like, but maybe they just get used to it. It's just building a muscle of hiring many people. It seemed, yeah. But one of the things I was going to ask you was about the open to work bubble on LinkedIn. How long did you take to post that?
I never posted it.
Oh, okay.
Like you're talking about the green little thingy, right?
The green.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I never posted it. And part of the reason why is that sometimes I find you get really weird unsolicited posts. Like, I don't know if anybody has gotten, like, I did uh I think because I'm a LinkedIn member, and if you say that you're open to work, you get um some,
Recruiters.
like you get
Yeah.
like there's a certain rule that, like, if they can send you messages or something like that. So I've been getting a lot of PMP, like spam messages from these accounts with very obvious fake names and fake profile pictures, and I'm like, like I don't want spam, and I would get quite a bit of spam coming in. Or yeah, that was my experience anyway. So like I never really put that banner up. Another reason why I didn't, and that is a very strategic decision for my part, is that I still engage a lot in a lot of these open conversations. And the last thing I want people to think before engaging with me, especially for the first time, is thinking that I have a hard ask or sell. Is the fact that I was looking to close a job. Like, it wasn't why I want to talk to them. And most of my conversations, like, I never even shared that because that was not relevant for the conversation. So I didn't want that to be very painfully obvious to everybody, because I do notice that this was from my experience of in a sabbatical, because especially I was on lunch club, I exhausted their limit for the week. So I was doing a lot of asks. Is that when people think that you have a sell or something to ask from them, they're very quick to say, no, I don't have, like, please don't knock on my door kind of thing. And yeah, that wasn't really the environment I wanted to set up before going into a conversation. I really just wanted to talk to them, learn something from them or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, from the people that I've talked to about the green circle,
Yeah.
basically, a lot of people hesitate putting it up,
Yeah.
like initially, which I did as well. It took
Huh?
me like a week or two to actually be like, okay, I think it was like a week to be like, okay, I'm gonna flip the switch, put
Yep.
it, do a little post, and it did create like an influx of like messages then,
Yep.
and then replying to that, which I would actually say don't do the green circle if you're like right out of it, because like you do almost need these first week or two to
Yeah.
like get your CV together, to get like structure, like
Yep.
we were talking about earlier. Because like what I found was like I put it up and then I was like overwhelmed by like so much stuff. I hadn't really set up my job hunt routine.
Yep.
And then so you're like trying to get back to all these people offering for help, and it's like too much while you're in your
Yeah.
first 2 weeks. So and then there's also like everyone does engage you at the same time, friends, family, all kinds of people, all channels. Doesn't need to be LinkedIn.
Yep.
They're like WhatsApping, SMS. So you have to be able to like balance the initial rejection and be like, I'm ready for the next hit, basically.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, like all my friends and family are going to contact me and be like engaging me about the fact I don't have a job, which is totally fine. I think
Yeah.
it's either you do it that way or you do it on one-on-one conversations. I felt ripping the band-aid off was the best for me, and,
Mhm.
and kind of jumping into that. But um, I did it too soon. Probably would have waited another week before I kind of like really was ready. And I'd never flipped the green circle on before. I think every other
Mm.
job hunt I've always kind of just like powered through like you,
Mm.
and kind of had very short gaps. But this time I did it because I was like, wow, the market's really bad. I might need that like
Yeah.
support from my network. And my network's been like super supportive.
Yep.
And I think because I'm posting things and content on LinkedIn and I have the green circle, I think it is reminding people like, okay, I got to look out for this guy. And everyone has been saying, yeah, they're going to
Yeah.
look for roles and that kind of stuff. So it's I think it's an effective way.
Yeah.
But it's like a tool you have to manage correctly.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, it's just mostly like timing. I didn't feel necessary. I see this message from Philip saying like you don't want people to believe you're talking with them to find work. This has specifically to do with like new conversations, and yes, I know from my personal experience that there was where if you preface, well, I'm going to speak solely from my experience. Everybody is entitled to their own. When I preface the conversation with I'm open to work or whatever, their first response is always thinking of me in that frame instead of thinking about all the other things I could possibly offer. And at least for me at my current stage of where I am in life and what I can do, I had far more openings for more creative types of work. Like, for example, um, like I'm building up a lot more. I'm working on a lot of things for like the course that I teach at York and also like my coaching and mentoring practice. So I really wanted the focus of the conversation to be a lot more there. And at the time at the time that I chose not to, it was also because I wanted to ease away from the job application. Like, so I had a very comfortable runway, so I was not like in any sort of urgent mindset to close any sort of job. So like if things change, like if I felt like, oh, I want to close within this calendar year, then I would have changed that. But yeah, just for where I was, I didn't feel it was necessary.
Yeah. And I think there were a few other points that I wanted to like quickly touch on, but like severance packages, there's something that like I feel like you only start to learn as you get into this world and of tech. And I think that people assume they read Google gave someone 6 months and they're like, okay, you're in that meeting, Zoom calls on, you're like, I'm gonna get 6 months. It's like it ranges like crazy. Like what every company does, what your contract is, what their balance sheet is. Like when a role is sometimes eliminated, I thought that was a restructuring, but my lawyer friends were like, no, a restructuring is when the company's like dissolving and it's like an absolute mess. So you're getting laid off. And at
Oh.
that point, you're basically collecting like the scraps and you gotta just be okay with that. So like that's what a restructuring like legally is. Whereas like,
Mm.
what we often are impacted by, it's just like roles being shot basically.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh.
like in your experience, like did you talk to other people about severance, like how it all works and that kind of stuff once you were laid off?
Yeah, I spoke to an employment lawyer, and they, because my work had done the layoff in, like, basically they gave me notice, and I had only been working for them for a relatively short period of time. They were like, so given like that lawyer gave me guidance like, hey, you can choose to pursue for a much larger severance pay. However, they already gave you notice. So that's a major difference in the way mine played out versus others. So because mine gave notice of dismissal, like basically that 2 week, that was considered the severance period. And I was like, oh, interesting. And they said also because of my age that like there's more that I could fight on, but it didn't sound like they had a lot of confidence in that. And I was like, you know what? I'm okay with that. This maybe like for me, it had a lot to do with like that frame of mind of going into this opportunity. I know I know what they had um, gone into, and I know what the state of the company is right now. So I know like, hey, fighting for that is like you can only draw so much from stone. It's like trying to draw more water from it. It's like I don't know what I'm fighting. Like if I was maybe like part of a larger organization, like big telco, a banking organization, where I know they have like stores of cash somewhere, that's maybe a different story. But here, I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I knew I was going to be very quick to kind of bounce into something else. So I was like, you know what, it's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I had a similar conversation. I talked to, and like there is a type of lawyer called an employment lawyer. I like reached out to a
yeah,
bunch of friends and got pointed in the right direction. And if you Google employment lawyers, you can kind of get one. Sometimes your severance contract actually has an expiry date.
hmm,
Um, that can be challenging to fit those calls in before that actually comes up. But I had a
yeah,
similar thing where they were basically like, what you are getting is probably fine. Like if you
yeah,
fought it, you could maybe get more, but then our fees of the lawyer's fees will
yeah,
eat into that gain. And so there's like this diminishing returns. And then sometimes you just want to like move on.
yeah,
And so there is like, they mentioned like age skill set specialists. I think one of the other challenges is that like as we specialize in our careers, we become like less transferable too.
Yes.
And so technically the severance should accommodate for that. But what I've learned is that like really it depends on the company's health, not like your own personal specialization and like a whole bunch of other factors. And on the telco piece, it's like, yeah, you could fight them, but they can lawyer up, no problem. They're like
Yeah.
already ready. And so it's like, and then there's also, if you're part of a mass layoff, then it's like they're going to compare your comp with someone else's comp on a set standard and a whole bunch of variables. So like, are you personally going to get more? So it's like severance is like a super complicated. It took me like, I basically spent 4 days of digging into severance stuff and then was like, then that allowed me to accept what I got, which is like, maybe I should have just moved on, but like it gave me like closure that I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
this is fine.
Yeah. I remember engaging with an employment lawyer for the very first time when I signed the employment contract because my situation was a little bit odd because it was a US based startup, but yeah, you learn a lot. But I didn't really, maybe it has a lot to do with my own person, but I'm like, I didn't really want to fight it. My Even though the lawyers would be essentially doing the work, you're emotionally tied to something when you're actively engaging. And I thought they were very generous already. And the way that they had, um, like gave me the news and the notice that they gave was quite generous already, considering like, remember at the point that I was laid off, which was my last day was June 9th. So I got the notice 2 weeks before that. The economy as a whole has been going through layoffs since Q4 of 2022. And I've been hearing all of everyone's stories of what it was like to get laid off, where they like, wake up and then they see an email message like, oh, by 9:01, you'll get an email letting you know whether you're here, you're staying or not. And I'm like that caused way more anxiety compared to what I got, which was just a very civil conversation about the realities of what we're facing. And I'm like, okay. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah. And I think that that is the thing that we're all going through right now. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think the more of us have, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation on this kind of the sticky topic of kind of layoffs and severance and in the first 2 weeks, because that's the you don't take a course on, like, you can take a course on how to improve your CV or get a consultant on it, but like having the conversation about your first 2 weeks and the feeling of going into the call and like HR is there or a lawyer is there, it's like, I don't think you'll ever get good at that, but you can get better at kind of adjusting to it.
Yeah.
We can all share our experiences to know that that's normal to kind of leave and be knocked off your feet.
Yeah. Well, you could talk about EI. That's something that probably for a lot of people, this is their first time. And like that process alone is like, you better know what you're doing. You can easily kind of mess things up, miss a deadline.
Yeah. Having applied, it's, as a product person, you're like, can we not hire some of our people from the tech community here to fix this system? Like, it's like a horrible, like, I'm like, you could make a better questionnaire with Typeform and like, there's so much better stuff out there to like, all these radio buttons and like, then it's not clear. Like, they don't even do good tooltips that kind of explain things. It's like, that UX is like 20. Yeah. So yeah, I found out that my severance is when like it goes for a period and you can't double dip on EI. There's like a window there, but then the system doesn't seem to be like smart enough to recognize when that window is. And it asks you like, did you get paid recently? I'm like, no, but like, but like the severance can overlap that. And like, even though your employer is reporting to them and you're reporting to them accurate information, it's not like putting the data together. I'm like, what? Like, I just, maybe we assume things work because we're private sector people, but like, it's not a great system. You'll probably end up calling EI. Like, I called them once already, was on that call for like an hour trying to sort basic stuff out that you'd think they would have web forms and a few other things that
or reminders.
Call back. Yeah. Reminder. Yeah. Even like an add to calendar Google widget.
Yeah.
Basic startup on day one kind of thing.
Yeah. And they're like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
if you miss it, then I think I get it's a lesson on like positive friction. Like that was something that crossed my mind when I was going through that process. I'm like, is this positive friction? Because like, it's like yeah, they make it difficult, but they want to make sure that you need this. So you will put that effort to put those reminders in for yourself every 2 weeks to fill out that report. Otherwise, did you ever need it at all? And I'm like, "Oh."
But
Hmm.
I think that's the like sunny side of the coin. As a PM that likes to focus on accessibility when I can, it's like an incredibly inaccessible process. I'm like,
Yeah.
how is it that I finished a degree from a great school and I finished this and I'm like, I got to go to my Monday call with you guys and be like, how does this system work? Like, read everything and I'm like, I have no clue what's going on. Like, there's no videos, there's no tutorials. It's like you get a piece of paper with a code on it. Like, I'm like, what? Where's
Yeah.
the pie paper?
And
Like,
don't
could you
lose
not
it.
have automated
Yeah.
a call to me and like said, hey, punch in something? Like,
Yeah.
still paper. Yeah, don't lose it. Yeah,
Yeah, don't lose
exactly.
it. Like that's the one thing about all government documents. You lose it, oh no, you're gonna have to go through like hell and back just to try to like get back onto something.
Yeah. So I think it's like an incredibly inaccessible
Yes.
process, which they should work on. But hopefully, at least it is accessing or processing the forms, which apparently the American system didn't right when COVID hit. So at least our digital system kind of is half baked and seems to work okay.
Oh, you're saying that the Canadian system is better than the US system? I've never heard I've never
I heard during when the
yeah.
pandemic hit that they literally couldn't process the volume of applicants because it was so they jacked the friction to the max on that to like make people not want to apply. Whereas our system, like I feel like it's not great. It's
Yeah.
but like it kind of works. If once like I feel like after a couple cycles, you're like, I
Yeah.
get it, I can do this.
Yeah.
But it's like from an onboarding perspective, like someone's got to tell the CRA what onboarding is and how to do it because they haven't taken that course in Reforge. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I remember helping some family members apply for the CERB benefit. Remember that? The COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember helping them and yeah, not the most accessible, but at least like it worked. Like I called a number, punched a couple things, and they were able to get the benefit. It was as far as government things go, pretty easy. But I didn't realize like how hard the US systems were.
Yeah, during
Well,
during COVID, I listened to a few podcasts about how their forums were just taking their systems down.
oh wow. Wow.
But yeah, I know we've gone a few minutes over, so
Yep.
thanks for connecting on this, and hopefully everyone that kind of has been watching from home got something out of it. And I'm putting together some stuff for a future episode. I'm just gonna bring on a recruiter. I got another person interested in AI in the job hunting
Ah,
space. So got a few other kind of talks that I'm trying to line up now. So stay tuned. I'll post
yeah.
some more information soon. But yeah, thanks for some great support these last few weeks, like as a job hunting team, and all the kind of energy you brought to the call.
Yeah. Well, I
All
can't wait to
right,
see more.
thanks guys.
Okay, bye.